Hello there, and welcome aboard another episode of Rule the Waves 2 Design Studies. It seems like my last episode, all about armor testing, stirred up quite the bee's nest. So I've spent the past week doing a whole lot more testing and investigating things much more in depth. This time, actually recording my statistics in as much detail as I could achieve, so we could potentially get more usable results, let's say. So first things first, I tested a variety of ship sizes and armor schemes. So we have some 50,000 ton ships, same as what we ran last time. We have some 90,000 ton ships, and we have some 73,000 ton ships, all of which were rung through the ringer to see how they work out. Also, some quick questions came up during the design process about how I designed my ships and what level of technology they were equipped with. And to answer that, my initial response was that most of these ships were designed using 1930 technology, but a lot of people were confused by what that really means. So let's take a quick look, and I'll answer that question now. So, when I say 1930 technology, it comes down to this right here. The Rule the Waves 2 wiki has a record of all of the technologies that we can research in-game, the effects that they have, what year they become available, and all of this data is taken straight out of the game files. So those, let's see if I remember correctly, you can find those under data. Where was it? There we go. Research Areas 2 has the actual data that the wiki was written based on. But the important thing is, it tells you what year this technology is roughly expected to become developed. So when I say 1930 technology, I mean that every single technology with the date 1930 and every technology prior to that is unlocked in the game save file. And if I say 1940 technology, I mean that every technology with the year 1940 and earlier has been unlocked, but nothing after that. So, for example, 1930 technology, I would get this technology here, but not that one there because it's a little bit past the date. However, a later designed ship, designed in 1940, would have all the way up through this one. Alright, so now that we've got that out of the way, let's take a look at some of these designs, and I'll tell you what we actually did to come up with them. So first things first, let's actually open the design here so you can see what we're working with. 50,000 ton ship, 28 knots. This is based on a design I actually played with in my last playthrough, and it's basically the same as that with only minor changes. Essentially, the only thing that I changed was the armor scheme, going with a sloped deck and slightly heavier protection overall. But the deck thickness and overall hardware layouts are essentially the same. Just a little bit more armor protection overall because in my previous playthrough, I built these ships in the 1920s, not 1930. So, minor differences there, but overall, it's a well-rounded, or what I would consider to be a well-rounded battleship. When I first ran my tests, I had 16-inch quality -1 guns. For the next rounds of tests, I bumped that up to quality 1 guns to see if additional armor penetration would make a difference. And, well, we'll talk about those results in a little bit. But for now, let's go over all the different designs that we tested. So this was the sloped deck ship for 50,000 tons. Since the deck armor contributes to your belt thickness in a sloped deck ship, we have an effective belt of about 16.5 inches, which is pretty solid protection right there. Then we have the all or nothing ships. So these ones, straight up, 16-inch belt, 4-inch deck. Other than that, essentially identical with virtually identical overall performance, overall armor, and handling. Since the armor scheme is literally the only thing that changed, I figure that this is a relatively fair design as far as testing is concerned. However, not everyone was entirely satisfied with that, so we also tried a few other designs. So first of all, we have a 73,000 ton design based on some that I found on online. So here we have the all or nothing design. This one comes with a much heavier deck protection, 7 inches of deck protection, which is what you actually need if you're trying to get immunity to late war dive bombing attacks. Against guns, this will almost always be completely overkill, because even at the ranges where deck penetrations are possible against large caliber guns, the odds of scoring such a hit are still much lower than the odds of scoring a belt hit. So there's not a whole lot of benefit in terms of capital ship on capital ship combat to having too much deck. So this is our all or nothing design, 7 inches of deck, 16 inches of belt. And then here we have our sloped deck design. And this one, 7 inches of deck, 12 inches of belt. Again, armor protection is the only thing that has changed. In this particular case, because sloped deck, the deck protection contributes to your belt thickness, the sloped deck ship had significantly more side protection, or significantly more effective side protection than the all or nothing ship. And that did play a role in the final results of the testing. So I also built a third all or nothing ship. This time, we'll take a look at that. This time I had to reduce the deck because the all or nothing ship before could not put sufficient belt on. So I reduced the deck enough that the side protection was equivalent. And in that case, we'll take a look at the statistics for that as well. Lastly, I also built some 90,000 ton proper juggernauts with essentially immune to everything at all functional ranges. Now, these juggernauts, the 90,000 ton ships, were built with 1940 technology, not 1930. So you notice right now I'm still set for 1930 technology. If I try and design this ship now, I'm 1,600 tons overweight. And my armor protection is not as significant as it was. But these ships were built with 1940 technology. They have better performance, or they have stronger armor, and they did come in at the correct weight given 1940 technology. So that was the slope deck ship, and here's the all or nothing ship. At this large of a ship, they have fundamentally equal protection, both in terms of equal deck and in terms of equal side protection. So once you get this big, it's not terribly hard to get equivalent levels of protection. All right, and while we were at it, there was also some questions raised about protection against smaller caliber hits as well. So I also built some smaller ships to test the effects of small caliber spam. We can see those right here. Quick view here. This is the 6-inch spam cruisers. Whole idea here was just to throw a whole lot of shells at them. In this particular case, I deliberately additionally unlocked the autoloader feature so that I could throw even more shells at the test ships. I'm not sure if this actually has a whole lot of effect overall, though. The autoloader is a nice bonus, but I don't know how much of effect that actually had in the long run It was just to throw more shells. And then we also have the 8-inch spam ships as well. These ones did not actually see a whole lot of testing. You'll see why when I get to the statistics. All right, speaking of statistics, let's actually take a look at those numbers. So here we go. So here we have my results. First things first, with the 50,000 ton ships, here's the results of 10 battles, how much total damage they took, how many heavy caliber hits they took, and whether the ships were sunk or not. So, as we can see here, despite these ships having fundamentally equivalent protection, so we can see that down here, I included the statistics here. We're looking effective protection. Hang on, my math is off for that. I'll have to fix that before I post that. But for now, these 50,000 ton ships had fundamentally equivalent protection. And yeah, things did not go well for the slope deck ships. They got sunk much more often, roughly twice as often as the all or nothing ships. The overall battle results were not quite as lopsided. It was still not good, though. They were coming in roughly equal in terms of total wins versus losses, 5 versus 5. But when the slope deck ships won, they just barely eked out a victory. And when the all or nothing ships won, they absolutely crushed the slope deck ships. So we did see there is a difference between these two ships. Now, I also tried to do some math to figure out what those differences were, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Let's take a look at our 73,000 ton ship results. So here we go. Things did not go well for the all or nothing ships in this case, because the all or nothing ships had significantly less effective protection. So we can see right down here, in this case my math actually worked. And yeah, the all or nothing ships had significantly less effective side protection, and that shone through quite noticeably. The all or nothing ships got absolutely crushed in terms of number of ships sunk. In terms of actual battle results, it was a little bit closer than that, though. It was 6 victories for the slope deck ships and 4 victories for the all or nothing ships. But again, as shown in previous battle tests, this was done entirely under AI control, aside from momentary reforming the group and turning it back onto AI control. So this was no real personal biases here. We can clearly see that the slope deck ship was able to get better effective protection, and therefore it won quite handily. However, I also wanted to see what would happen if I took the same ships and gave them equivalent protection, so that's where that other 70,000 ton ship came in, where I traded some of that deck thickness to get additional belt. So we can see that test here. As you can see, slightly higher belt thickness for the all or nothing ship, roughly equivalent effective protection. And in this particular case, things went basically the exact other way around. With the first round of testing, the slope deck ships got 6 victories to 4. With the second round of testing, with equivalent protection, the all or nothing ships got the 6 victories, and the slope deck ships got 4. And we can also see the ratio of sunk ships was also completely turned around as well. The slope deck ships were sunk much more often than the all or nothing ships for essentially equivalent protection. Now, I also took a look at 90,000 ton ships. Again, 10 rounds of testing, purely AI control, and Yeah, here we have, again, effectively equivalent protection, slightly in favor of the slope deck ships, and things did not go well for the slope deck ships. The slope deck ships won 4 rounds and were defeated 6 times, and they also had more ships sunk. So yeah, things did not go terribly well. So there's looking like there's something different between the slope deck ships and the all or nothing ships when you have equivalent levels of side protection. Now, that is not to say that slope deck ships are entirely deficient. They are more weight efficient as far as deck protection goes, because that deck thickness contributes to both your side protection and your deck protection, allowing much heavier deck thicknesses for a given overall level of protection. So, as people have pointed out on the forums and on the Discord, slope deck ships definitely have an advantage when it comes to smaller ships, earlier construction, being able to get more effective deck protection. So, as we saw, my 50,000 ton ships, they don't have a whole lot of deck thickness. And that is a distinct vulnerability against late game dive bombers, which can easily go through 6 inches or more of deck thickness. So these ships, both of these ships, would be quite vulnerable to that. Whereas the 73,000 ton ships, the slope deck ship would be immune to those major deck hits, and the all or nothing ship would not be. They would have some resistance, but not as much as we could have. So this all or nothing ship, well, it's all or nothing. It is entirely built for anti-surface roll. It does not have sufficient protection against air threats. Alright, now let's actually try and figure out what the difference is between the slope deck and the all or nothing ships. So I did as much math as I could with the data that I was able to record. So I recorded the total number of hits scored, how many hits we got on survivors to see if there was a difference between those, trying to average out how much damage we were doing per hit on the slope deck versus all or nothing ships to see if there was a difference. And, well, there's not a whole lot of one. So we're seeing somewhat more damage on ships that were sunk. At least here on the 73,000 ton ships, we're seeing more damage on the ships that were sunk. On the survivors, though, that's pretty close, all things considered. Slightly more damage on the all or nothing ships, which is not what I would have expected. Going over to the 90,000 ton ships, well, that one, it's the exact other way around. Significantly less damage per hit on the all or nothing ships, and the slope deck ships were taking more damage per hit. Then we go over to the non-equivalent protection on these ships, and that actually worked out essentially equivalent. I also took a look at the deviation from average for each individual ship. So this right here is the average deviation from the overall average for each individual ship in the group. And, well, it's not looking too bad. There's some deviation here, but it's not too standing out. Taking a look at the 50,000 ton results, again, similar stuff where we're seeing roughly equivalent damage on the surviving ships. So I'm not sure why the slope deck ships were sunk so much more consistently than the all or nothing ships when they had equivalent protections. Now, when there was a different level of protection, oh yeah, that absolutely makes sense. The all or nothing ships got absolutely crushed. They had significantly less protection, so it totally makes sense. When they had equivalent levels of protection, though, I don't know. And I was not able to pull any particular statistics suggesting why the all or nothing ships were doing better. Now, I also took a look at what happens when these ships were subjected to spam. This test was actually quite a bit more difficult to do because I could not just set a battleship versus 5 cruisers and turn on AI control, because the AI cruisers would just turn away and run, which honestly is the entirely sensible thing to do. So unfortunately for those tests, I had to take direct control over the cruisers and charge them into point blank range. And now when I did that, and when the AI battleship cooperated and allowed me to get nice and close, I was able to score sufficient hits to do damage and sink the battleship. So we do have some statistics from that here. And yeah, pretty much when you hit a battleship, any sort of battleship, with quite a few hundred 6-inch shells, it's gonna sink. And yeah, that definitely shows through here. We've got ships sinking with 500, 600, 400. All of that is a lot of shells for even the best armored battleships to stand off against. I also did one round of testing apiece against the larger ships, the 73,000 ton ships and the 90,000 ton ships, and they all went down with about the same amount of damage. The 90,000 ton ship went down with 500 and some odd hits, just a hair over 500 6-inch hits, and that was for both the slope deck and the all or nothing. And that's keeping in mind that the slope deck ship also had much heavier belt extended armor as well. So yeah, that extra belt extended does not really help against small caliber spam. We were not seeing a significant difference there. Not with 3 inches of belt extended and not with 7 inches of belt extended. I think most of the damage here was due to flooding causing hits in unprotected areas like bow and stern hits and just hull hits that don't hit the armor belt. Which, how that causes flooding, I don't know, but it does sometimes. So yeah, no real usable data, I think, that we can pull from the spam test, and I don't have any particular ideas on how to test this category any further. So at this point, I'm not really quite sure what to say. There is some sort of difference between the all or nothing and slope deck ships. That much has been consistent between the levels of tests. Across all classes of ships that I tested, when they had equivalent levels of protection, the all or nothing ships outperformed the slope deck ships. That said, the slope deck ships are better able to get a higher level of protection, at least the moderately sized juggernauts, so 70,000, 50,000, big ships, but not the true titans, 90,000 ton behemoths. They slope deck ships were able to get more overall protection. So, I don't know. This one, I guess it depends upon what you're expecting to face. If you're expecting to face a significant air threat, then it looks like slope deck ships are the way to go. They have, straight up, much more protection against slope deck. And I can see why the real metagame is to go for slope deck. If you know that dive bombers will have up to 6.5 inches of penetration in late game performance, if you can design a ship in the 1920s and 1930s that has 7 inches of slope deck, it's going to be immune to dive bombing pretty much through its entire career. So there's definite advantages there. That said, if you're willing to give up a little bit of that resistance to dive bombing, it looks like you can build a slightly stronger battleship by shaving off a little bit of deck thickness to put on more belt. So I guess it depends upon what you expect your opponents to be doing and what you expect to be facing. If your primary design purpose is to face off against other surface combatants, you're probably better off with all or nothing. If your primary expected opponent is carriers and air attack, well, then you're probably better off with slope deck. I'm sure there's other situational considerations as well, such as if you're facing off against destroyers, cruisers, etc. Again, I'm not entirely sure. There's probably far more testing that could be done here. So, that said, I've spent pretty much my entire week running through these tests, and I'm pretty much sick of it, so I'm not doing any more in-depth testing on this particular topic anymore. If anyone else wants to, then they are welcome to. Alright, I do have one other topic that I want to talk about, because this also showed up a little bit in discussions on the Discord, and that is unit machinery. So we'll take a quick look at that. Unit machinery is a technology for propulsion that eliminates the chance of getting the engine's disabled critical hit event. This is a small cost in extra weight to your ship, but it eliminates one particular critical hit from being a possibility, or at least significantly reduces the probability of that critical hit happening. It has also been suggested, based on my experience in my last few playthroughs, that unit machinery would reduce the effects of propulsion limiting critical hits. So, I set out to test that and verify. So let's take a quick look at how we did that. So I built two cruisers. Hang on, I scrolled right past. Here we go. The Light Cruiser 1 and the Light Cruiser 2 with unit machinery. These two ships are identical. So I can see right here, this is a basic light cruiser, again built with 1930 technology. I stuck with single guns because, I don't know, I just needed something real quick, so I hit auto design and basically tweaked it in from there. Nothing too special there. So this is a auto design cruiser, and yeah, I then took that exact same cruiser and I threw on unit machinery. Had to shave off a few AA guns, but other than that, these two ships worked out exactly the same. So here we go. Two cruisers, only significant difference between them being one has unit machinery and the other does not. And then I played a number of battles against each other. Unfortunately, there's no particularly easy way to find out how much propulsion damage a particular critical hit has unless you know how fast it was going before the critical hit, and then you see what its new propulsion is afterwards. So these tests actually took quite a bit more time than the armor tests that I did with the battleships earlier, because I had to go through turn by turn, checking speeds, seeing what critical hits happened, recording new speeds. Basically, yeah, this one was a big old pain in the butt. And I only got through 8 rounds of testing, not 10 or more like I was originally intending. But at this point, I'm a day late, and I still haven't put this episode out yet. So yeah, we're calling it that enough testing for now. Let's take a look at the results. So, real quick, oops, sorry, here we go. Unit machinery testing. So, these were all of the propulsion damaging hits that we took. Please note this does not include any of the hits that just caused flooding and had to reduce speed due to lost buoyancy. So there were also a number of those hits, and I did not document those because those were just lost speed due to buoyancy loss. So we had a number of times where ships got hit and the belt extended and took flooding damage, or splinters damaged hull, and that caused flooding damage, various other effects that caused flooding damage and reduced the ship's speed due to buoyancy loss. But these were all of the critical hits and propulsion damaging hits that occurred. So we can see we've got 4 playthroughs as the unit machinery ships. These were all the critical hits that occurred here. 4 playthroughs as non-unit machinery. These are all the critical hits that occurred here. And as we can see, there's no real difference. Splinter's perforate uptakes was consistently doing 3 to 4 knots of speed loss no matter what. We've got some -3s over here, we got some -4s over here, we got some -3s over here, we got some -4s up here. So no significant changes there. We did have some edge room hit belt penetrations. These seem to be the worst types of hits you can take, doing, well, quite a bit of damage to propulsion, between -6 and -13. Now, to be honest, I'm not sure how much of that speed loss on the higher end was due to flooding caused as well, because I remember this particular one, they got hammered. It wasn't just an edge room hit belt penetration. There was a few other hits as well. So this might not be quite as bad, but as it as the measured result. But I think overall it goes to show that, yeah, getting hit in the engine room, that's bad news. And we're also seeing not a whole lot of difference between the two sides. We only had 1 saltwater enters feed tanks critical hit. I was expecting more, honestly. We did have 2 splinters damage machinery effects. In both cases, that did -6 knots of speed. I was actually kind of surprised we only had 1 machinery repaired report. Maybe that's because the cruisers were very aggressive and they got in close, and I think the battles were over before we had any time to really repair machinery. So I don't have a good feel for how easy it was to repair machinery or how much propulsion was restored. We only had 1 real event there. I think it's also worth pointing out we did have 1 critical hit engines disabled on the non-unit machinery type. Didn't have any over here. But, well, I think we're still looking at a relatively small sample. All I can say from this is that there does not appear to be any difference in terms of propulsion damage from any particular propulsion damage causing events. So, yeah, it looks like unit machinery, really all it does is eliminate the engine's disabled critical hits, as reported. So, if that's worthwhile, I don't know. I do think it's worth pointing out that the ships with unit machinery, they tended to lose the fights more often than the ships without, and I have no idea why, given that there's no real difference there. But in terms of overall number of sunk ships, it actually worked out pretty even there. I forgot to actually write down the numbers there, but again, it worked out pretty even, all things considered. So yeah, that's the results of this last week's worth of testing. I know there hasn't been any real fighting to show you this time. It's been a whole bunch of boring spreadsheets and such, but if you want to peruse my statistics for yourself or do any of the testing yourself, I'll be sure to post the designs that I used and also post links to this spreadsheet that I've been using as well. So if you guys want to take a look at that, you're welcome to as well. Until then, this is Katori87 signing off.